again, my name is Hailey Bunker. I'm presenting today on What the Head and Neck. This is a study looking at the integration of embryology into a gross anatomy tutorial. So how did we conduct this study? Well, first of all, I'd like to thank Dr. Lee, my Capstone mentor, Dr. Jennifer Stratford, who's worked on our statistics and helped me through that whole process, Dr. Orr, my Capstone chair, and Jennifer Thurston, who's always giving us so much support, as well as Yu Jung Chow. She provided me with one of the 3D models that I added on to for this study, my classmates, and then the participants of this study, the first and second year dental students. Some background, so the past two presentations have been on cranial nerves. Lucky for me, I don't have to talk too much about them. I focused on head and neck anatomy for this tutorial because I felt like it was one of the most difficult things for me to learn. I also wanted to look at the embryology because we took embryology in our first semester and then took gross anatomy, and I felt personally that embryology content and background helped me to understand the head and neck anatomy. So the anatomy specifically that I used were cranial nerves 5, 7, 9, and 10, which are the mixed motor and sensory cranial nerves. And personally, I think the most difficult to know. And then the pharyngeal arches, which are the primordial structures that lead to head and neck structures in an adult. And you can see that in this 3D model here on the right. So some background, why am I looking at integration? Why does integration matter? So over the past 20 years or so, we've seen curricular-wide changes in dental education, medical education. Traditionally, what happens is the first 2 years of medical school and dental school are basic sciences, anatomy, biology, genetics, those kinds of things. And then the second 2 years are clinical anatomy. But with the increased access we have to so much information and all the new data that comes out, we've lost curricular hours. So we've lowered the amount of time that's spent on anatomy and the other basic sciences. So how do we teach the same amount of material in less time? And so one of the solutions to that is to integrate the curriculum. So there's been a lot of studies that have shown that more and more schools, professional programs are integrating their basic science curriculum. And as you can see from this Burke et al. Study, embryology is one of the most commonly integrated courses. And you can see here that it's most commonly integrated with gross anatomy and histology. And like I said, from my personal experience, I felt that the embryology content helped me with gross anatomy. So that's what I really wanted to look at. Another thing that we've seen to combat these lower contact hours is more resources, and specifically more online resources. With the past year in the COVID-19 pandemic, our first year dental students had their entire lecture on anatomy delivered via Zoom. So I wanted to look at how does integration affect these digital resources? So what is our big question? Does integrating embryology into a gross anatomy head and neck tutorial lead to better learning, retention, and confidence in dental students? And then our hypothesis based on the research is that the integrated tutorial will lead to better learning, retention, and confidence compared to a standalone tutorial. So how did we conduct this study? I recruited first and second year dental students. The first years are enrolled in a basic anatomy course, and the second years are enrolled in an advanced head and neck anatomy course. I sent them all an email with a Google survey to make it really accessible for the students. And that had some survey questions on demographics and that kind of thing, as well as 10 questions focused on gross anatomy content. So I didn't ask any questions on the embryology. The students were randomized into control and experimental groups. The control group was sent the mixed cranial nerve anatomy tutorial that did not have any embryology content. And then the experimental group was sent a tutorial that had the embryology of the pharyngeal arches, as well as the exact same content on the mixed cranial nerves. All the students were then sent a post-test and survey, 10 different questions covering the exact same gross anatomy content, as well as some survey items asking about what they felt about the resource, some strengths, some weaknesses, as well as some Likert scale questions that we'll get to. Because of the second year's curriculum with advanced head and neck anatomy, they cover cranial nerves pretty readily. So I wasn't able to send them a retention test without having that confound of their course content. Therefore, I only sent a retention test to the first year dental students. And we'll look at that data in just a second. So with all of this, what did we find out about integration? There's no significance between the control and experimental groups. So you can see here on this graph, This is showing the pre and post quiz scores for all the cohorts and all the groups. And we did see significance from the pre to post quiz scores. So the students were learning a little bit by watching the videos. However, we did not see any difference in the percent change between our first and second year dental students and the control and experimental group. Excuse me, I said there was a significant difference between the first and second year cohorts in their percent change, but not between our control and experimental groups. So that leads to our hypothesis not being true and that the integrated content had no effect on student learning. We saw similar results with the retention. We saw improvement from the pre to the retention. There was a little bit of decrease from the post to the retention. That was significant. However, there was still an increase from the pre-quiz to the post-quiz score, or the retention quiz score. Again, no difference between our control and experimental groups. Our survey results, again, showed a similar story. We asked the students about their confidence in cranial nerve anatomy. It improved across the board, however, no difference between our control and experimentals. We did ask those two open-ended questions about any improvements that they would make and any strengths they found in the resource. Across the board, they really liked the 3D models that I used. I found them on Sketchfab, and I used a 3D model that Yu Jung had created and added the cranial nerves to that. They really liked the video format. They could pause, they could rewind, they could rewatch the videos. And all the students wanted more of a summary and a review at the end of the tutorial. So that would be something I would change. An example, I appreciate the concise delivery and 3D model presentation. I really loved that there was a 3D visual representation. Some unique themes for our experimental group was that they liked that it was to see the embryology. They felt that it was helpful in understanding the context and why the nerves were where they were. Because when you see these structures in person in gross anatomy lab, it can be very overwhelming in trying to figure out why they're located where they are. But with the development, it kind of gives you a little bit more of a story. And the students appreciated that. Some conclusions. Our hypothesis was rejected that the integrated content did not affect student learning, retention, or confidence. So again, there was no difference between the two tutorials. However, both tutorials led to improved performance on quizzes. So the online resources were helpful. And students really like video tutorials with 3D diagrams. So it's nice to see a 3D diagram in person, but they also like the 2D visual of a 3D diagram in a video. Some future directions, I would love to test whether or not the video affected their embryology content, because that's one of the biggest advantages to integrating, is that you're also exposing the students to embryology. So that would be a forward direction. Improve upon the online tutorials based on the student feedback, and some more research on integration's role in student learning. And with this type of study design, it's pretty easy to re-implement this multiple times in different videos and distribute that to students pretty easily. And with that, are there any questions?
Thank you, Hailey. That was great. Any questions for Hailey?
Dr. Orr put one in the chat.
Thank you, Marissa. Any thoughts on other benefits this is from Dr. Orr. Any thoughts on other benefits to integration besides just performance on your quizzes?
Yeah, so like based on the student feedback, I think one of the biggest advantages is just providing content. So it's a little more than just memorizing the cranial nerves and what they're innervating. So like it provides a little bit of a story for the students to understand. I think that's one of the biggest advantages. Also, like I said, I didn't test embryology content on this, and most of the students in dental school and medical school have to take embryology at some point. So combining those two areas can create like a little bit more overlap and less time spent on individual things. So I think that's one of the other major advantages for sure.
Yeah, I was wondering whether or not different questions would have resulted in something more significant in terms of the outcome. Things that maybe needed to know a little bit about embryology would have changed the outcome in terms of significance.
Yeah, and that definitely could be the case. Like I said, I think a future direction would be testing their embryology knowledge. But I think the one thing I really wanted to know was, does embryology content alone add to understanding gross anatomy? And so I really just wanted to focus in on those gross anatomy type questions for this specific study. But yeah, I do think that would be a very interesting follow-up study.
Any other questions for Hailey? All right. Thank you.